So tonight's the third and last of our 3 sessions on the parables of Jesus. The first week, we kind of emphasized talking about how the parables communicate. So we talked about how I see the difference between analogy and allegory, and I argued that what Jesus is doing in the parables is like my definition of analogy. And the second week, we looked at the kingdom parables from Matthew 13 and selected a set of them to look at. Tonight, I want to take a tour through the major parables of Jesus. You have a little handout there. This is kind of a first draft for me. There are a few parables that didn't make it on this list because I wasn't quite sure what to do with them, so I just threw them out because I wasn't quite sure what to do with them. And I have not tried to compare Matthew, Mark, and Luke. There are several parables where there are different versions in several Gospels, and it's a little bit different in each, and I haven't tried to accommodate that here. This is just kind of to get an overview. I hope this makes sense. I'm going to go through this list and kind of explain to you what I think is going on, and I'm going to select certain parables as we go along to talk about. But I'm going to throw a lot of stuff at you tonight, and I hope that this kind of makes some sense. So we have 3 major themes that I'm saying are in the parables: the non-conquering Messiah, failed religion, and the time of testing. And we've talked about this up to this point. We talked about this a lot last week. The fact that the Messiah came, but he did not come as a conquering hero, dispensing rewards to his faithful followers among the Jews. We saw that in the kingdom parables last week. The fact that Jesus is highly critical of the religious leadership of the Jews. We saw that in the parable of the vineyard when we talked about that. And then the fact that Jesus has called us to live out our faith, which will be tested and challenged in various ways. We saw that in the parable of the sower and in other things. I would say this is the biggest theme in the parables, exploring the various ways that we need to live out our faith. Jesus' analogies are really intended to help us understand how to think about that. Why would we choose to take on the life that he is calling us to? Why would God have the values that he does, and so on? And that's what the parables are trying to communicate. So most of the parables, the majority of the parables are about that. And I have to say that typically those are the parables that kind of speak the most to me, because they're the ones that kind of help us to understand why is the life of following God like it is. Jesus' parables really help, to at least help me to understand, yeah, that makes sense, that it would be that way. So I've divided the parables into these 3 themes, but as we talked about last time, pretty much all of the themes run through all of the parables. All of the parables have this underlying assumption that the Messiah has delayed in fully establishing his kingdom, and so we are living in that time where he has called us to follow him, but we don't have the glorious triumphant kingdom to live in yet. All of the parables have something to say to the religious mindset of the Jews. Even the parables that are about this is how you ought to pursue your faith, a lot of them are specifically saying this is how you ought to pursue your faith, not like the Pharisees. And all the parables have implications for what it means to truly live a life of faith. So my organization here is kind of saying in this category are the ones that focus on one of these things. And you could see it will not take you long to think about, to realize, well, why don't you put that one in that category? And like I said, this is the first draft, so I don't have to answer that question. Ask me next time. Okay, so the non-conquering Messiah. The Messiah came, but he didn't kick out the Romans. He did not establish a kingdom of righteousness over all the world. He did not reward the Jews for their faithfulness. Instead, he was executed as a criminal and then went away. So, first, Under the non-conquering Messiah, the first subcategory under that I'm calling surprisingly small beginnings. And this is where we have the parable of the mustard seed, the leaven, and one that we didn't look at, the growing seed from Mark 4. But we talked about this last time when we were looking at the kingdom parables in Matthew 13. The kingdom did not come in glory. It will end in glory, but it starts so surprisingly small and insignificant. And notice that this is a correction to the thinking of the religious leadership, because they expected the Messiah to come in all-conquering glory. Okay, so we talked about some of those. The second thing that's talked about under this idea of the non-conquering Messiah is that there is no sorting yet. That is, sorting out the people of God from those who are not the people of God. Here we have the parable of the wheat and the tares and the dragnet. So we also talked about this briefly as we were looking at the kingdom parables last week. So for example, and one we didn't talk about in the parable of the dragnet, when a fisherman throws a dragnet into the water, he gets all sorts of fish. But he only wants certain ones. He wants the good ones, but he gets everything that goes into the net. His fishing method doesn't catch only the good ones. It catches everything that swims into the net. It isn't until the fishing is done and he can take the boat and put it up on the beach and pull the net up. Now he can sit down and he can say, okay, this one I want, this one I don't want. We'll toss that one. So likewise, Jesus' proclamation of the kingdom will attract all sorts. This is the time when there are all sorts of responses and it's all kind of gathered together, but it isn't until the end, on the day of judgment, that he will sort out the true believers from the rest. And this is also a correction to the thinking of the religious leadership, because they expected that when the Messiah came, he would reward them for their obedience. The expectation was the Messiah is going to come, we're going to sort this stuff out right now. And of course, we're over in the good pile, and then there are those sinners and tax gatherers and stuff, they're over there in the bad pile. That's not the way it turned out. So that's another theme that Jesus explores, that your expectation that this glorious reward and punishment dealing Messiah is going to come and settle everything, that's not the way it's working. Okay. The next of the two categories I'm saying that kind of define what Jesus did is this idea of failed religion. As I said before, in a way, all of Jesus' parables are aimed to correct the religious thinking of the time. But some parables are explicitly about the fact that the current religious climate and leadership have gone bad, and so God is rejecting them in favor of something else. So last time, so first category under this is that God rejects the religious culture. We certainly talked about the parable of the vineyard before. The current religious leadership are like vineyard keepers who refuse to give the owner his produce and ultimately end up killing his son. These other parables deal with similar ideas. There's a fig tree that's not giving any fruit. There's a feast, there's a banquet, the invited guests don't come. So the host is ticked off and he says, okay, we'll go invite some other people instead of them. So again, specifically dealing with the idea that God has a problem with the way the religious climate of the time is dealing with him. And I put in this category, there's a couple of parables that distinguish between the old and the new. The old needs to make way for the new. And that's the parable of the garment and the wineskin, where he's talking about you don't put new cloth on an old garment, you don't put new wine into an old wineskin. And the head of the household, that's where he says that the head of a household pulls out of his treasure some things that are old and some things that are new. All of this, I think, is speaking to how Jesus is presenting a new different way of thinking about the life of faith that must replace the old way taught by the Pharisees. And I would argue that the old is not the Old Testament. It's not the scriptures. It is the way that the religious leadership and the thinking of the people at the time has come to embody a religious culture. That is the old that needs to be put aside. Okay, so what I mostly want to emphasize tonight then is this third category, the time of testing. As I say, this is the theme that I find most compelling in the parables. And in fact, the majority of the parables explore this theme. Jesus, the Messiah, has come. He has proclaimed the good news. He has taught and clarified for us what God wants us to do, how he wants us to live. And he has left us to believe that gospel, embrace that gospel, and live out the implications of that gospel. So while he is gone, circumstances of real life are going to confront us with choices. We're going to have to decide, do we really believe this gospel? Am I really willing to embrace the implications of what it is I say I believe? And so on. That's what this whole body of parables is doing, is exploring what is it that God wants from us, and why would he want a thing like that? And how should we think about that? How should we feel about what God is calling us to do as believers in this time when Jesus is gone? Okay. So the first, I have a number under this category. The first I'm calling persecution and temptation, and this is basically where I have put the parable of the sower. We talked about this one quite a bit last time. The idea of the four soils, each soil responding to the seed differently. And in two of those, one of them, the soil grows up quickly, the plant, but then the plant dies because the roots are shallow, and that represented what happens under persecution if there is no deep root in the person. And another one of the soils was where there is competition from other plants, and there's no fruit that comes to the plant that was planted by the sower, and that represents worldly wealth and worldly troubles and all of those things that distract someone from actually pursuing the things of God. So that parable has a lot that you can talk about and a lot that you can think about, but that idea that ultimately the response to the gospel, that is the one that God is looking at, does not fail to persevere under persecution and does not succumb to the temptation of thinking that the wealth of this world is more important. And we talked about that last time. Okay. Did I get the right page here? Yes. Okay. The next topic under this category is deceptive wealth. And I've put two parables in this category, the rich fool from Luke 12 and the rich man and Lazarus from Luke 16. Both of these parables are about a rich person who made the wrong choice. Investing in wealth seemed like a good idea at the time. It seemed like a good idea to build bigger barns and store and really make myself wealthy. The rich man thought that his life of partying was the great way to go. Both of them ran into the pesky problem of death. That death comes along and sort of makes that decision about what you're going to do with wealth look a little foolish, because now where are you? The third under this category is related. I'm calling it gladly paying the price. They're related to the last group. The last group was about making the wrong choice about worldly wealth. These parables are about how we come to make the right choice about worldly wealth, how our thinking would be such that we would recognize, yeah, the wealth of this world is not all that it's cracked up to be. I might be willing to actually let go of some of that in order to gain the kingdom of God. Some of these parables about wealth are specifically aimed at the Pharisees. As Luke reports, after Jesus speaks a couple of parables about wealth. Now the Pharisees, who were lovers of money, were listening to all these things and were scoffing at him. And so several of the things that Jesus says about material wealth, materialism, that kind of thing, are actually speaking into the religious climate of the time, where it was you could be pious and pursue worldly material comfort very much at the same time. I really like this set of parables because each of them is aimed at kind of helping you to think and feel, oh yeah, I see why that would be a good choice. All of us recognize that money and possessions can solve a lot of problems in this world. I mean, I don't have to be convinced that it actually seems to be to my advantage to have more money than less. That seems to be something that I would want. It's not even neutral. It's like, he's got less money over here, we got more money over here. Which way do you want to go, Ron? I want more. Of course I want more. I mean, why wouldn't I want more? So why would I be willing to listen to talk about giving that up or paying the price, counting the cost, and all of that kind of language? Why would that seem like a good thing? Why would I actually choose to do a thing like that, thinking this is a wise move on my part? And that's what these parables are about, is how you can come to feel that that sort of choice is a wise move on your part. So we saw the parables of the treasure hidden in a field and the pearl of great price last week, especially the treasure hidden in the field. And remember, the idea was there that in both cases, the person was willing to give up all they had to get this thing. But the reason that they gladly gave up what they had to get this thing, whatever it was, is that they understood this thing is valuable. This thing that I am giving up everything for is worth it. I want to make that choice. The pearl merchant wants to give up all his stock to get this pearl because this is a great pearl. The guy buys the field he sells everything he has to buy the field because he recognizes there is an incredibly valuable treasure hidden in this field. I want it. Here, take everything I got. I'll take your field because of what he knows about it. So that shows you the sort of thing I'm talking about, is that it kind of shows how how our rationale and emotions could actually be behind something that seems like making a very costly choice. The other two parables are also really significant in this way. I was going to try to talk about all of this. I don't have time to talk about all of that. So I decided to talk about the one I talk about less often, which is the thing from Luke 14 here. I'm going to pick, there are two parables, one about building a tower and one of them about deciding whether to go to battle. And I've decided to talk about the battle one because it's easier for the point to emerge. But I would say that it's pretty much the same point in both of these parables. So again, the issue is my rationale. How should I think about this question of whether I am willing to pay a cost in worldly terms for gaining the kingdom of God? Okay, so we'll talk about this parable, Luke 14:31, the parable of the battle, I guess is what I'm calling it. So there's a setup to this. Before the parables start, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. Now, I recognize, we're gathered together here having a nice little evening and everything. This is really serious and sobering stuff that Jesus is saying. If you stop and think about it, I mean, he is not pulling any punches here. This is something he said. He noticed that a lot of people were following him. So he turned around and said, oh, well, I have something to tell you. You willing to give up your life? That's what I'm going to do. So he's talking about the sort of thing that may be demanded of someone who becomes his disciple. So first, it may be demanded of you that you lose the approval of your family. That's what this hating your father and mother stuff is all about. He doesn't mean you need to hate them, but the idea is that you value the kingdom of God, you value what God thinks of you more than you do what anyone in your family does. So if choosing to follow God means that your family doesn't want to have anything to do with you, then that's the choice you would make, even if you lose everything in that way. And even your own life, even if it cost you your life, you would choose to embrace the kingdom of God. And then whoever does not carry his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. I won't go into this a lot. I would argue that we sometimes make that statement too broad, as like, any problem coming your way is sort of carrying your cross. I think specifically, remember what a cross is. I mean, they didn't know that he was going to die on a cross, but they know what a cross is. It is what you execute people on. So it's kind of like saying anyone who follows me needs to carry his electric chair or something like that. I mean, it is this picture of I am carrying the means by which I will be executed. So I think he's talking about the hatred of the world, that you need to be willing to follow Jesus, even if it means the rest of the world doesn't like you, even to the point of doing you in. So very sobering thing that he's saying. After the parables that we're talking about here, he says, so then none of you can be my disciple who does not give up all that is his. Now, it's sometimes translated all his possessions, and it makes it sound like this statement is intended to be, in order to be my disciple, what I'm asking you to do is sell everything you have. Don't have any possessions. I think that's what he means. This is another statement like the ones before, kind of a summary statement. All that is his is like family, could include material wealth, the approval of the world, even your life. That is, there's nothing that I've got that is mine that I wouldn't be willing to give up in order to gain this kingdom that Jesus has come to offer. Okay, so because of this context, there's a very popular way of understanding the parables that go along with this. So one of the parables is about a guy who wants to build a tower, but he says, if you want to build a tower, you first figure out whether you've got enough materials to build a tower. Because if you start and you put down the foundation and then you can't finish it, all your neighbors are going to laugh at you. I mean, that's basically that story. And then the other story, which we're going to look at here, is about a king who's trying to figure out whether he has the resources to go to battle. Okay, so the very common way of explaining this is in the context of how you need to be willing to lose family and your life and the approval of the world and material possessions and all of that sort of stuff. So these are parables about counting the cost. So typically what is said is these parables are teaching us that before we become a disciple of Jesus, we need to count the cost. We need to see, do I have the resources that are required to follow Jesus? Because what's required is willing to lose your family, willing to lose your money, willing to lose your life, etc. So you take stock and say, do I have what it takes to make it all the way to the end? Do I have what it takes to lose my life if it's called for, or give up possessions if it's called for, or whatever? And if not, then give up. Don't do it. I don't think that's what these parables are teaching. And it was Jack years ago. I don't think I see the parable the way he does anymore, but he was the first one who kind of pointed out, I don't know anybody who lives that way. Who becomes a Christian and has figured out in advance, all of the challenges that they might face down the line, and I know, oh yeah, I can handle all of those. I've got what it takes. I mean, if I had been told that when I first became a Christian, I would have given up. I mean, if they said, do you have what it takes? I knew perfectly well the answer was no, I do not have what it takes. So if that's what this is saying, if you don't have what it takes, don't get on my team, then I would never have joined. But I don't think that's his point. I think there's a very different point. This is a minority view, as in I've never found anybody think agrees with me on this. So, just to warn you about that. So that may not be true. I'm not remembering well. I may have found somebody who agrees on this. So the two of us then. Okay, so here's the second parable, not the one about the tower, but the one about the king. Or what king, when he sets out to meet another king in battle, will not first sit down and consider whether he is strong enough with 10,000 men to encounter the one coming against him with 20,000? Or else, while the other is still far away, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace. Okay, so there's this king. He has his own kingdom. He's considering whether he's going to take on this other king who's coming this way. But he has to think about it. Before he goes out to fight this guy, he has to think, can I win this battle? He's got 20,000. I've only got 10,000. I'm thinking I'm going to lose. I'm going to go out and fight this guy, and I'm going to lose. So while he is still far away, before it comes to the battle, and I lose everything in this battle, I will send somebody and seek terms of peace. I'm going to just, I'm not going to fight this battle. I'm going to say, you win. Let's negotiate here. What would you like? What do you want from me in this situation? So the thing about this story is it's about a guy who's trying to decide before the other king comes whether he should seek peace with him now. And he decides, yeah, before he gets here and I lose the battle and lose everything, I better seek peace with him now. I'm going to seek terms of peace because that's going to be the best for me. So to me, that sounds very familiar. If you remember, we've talked about in parables, we're not told what the analogy is. We don't know actually what corresponds to what in this story. So we're left to try to figure out what reality is he talking about. Well, what makes sense to me is that's the situation that I am in regarding God. That right now, I'm waiting for that day when he comes, but now is the time when I have to come to terms with him. Now is the time that I have to decide what I'm going to do, because if I put it off and I try to take him on when he comes, it's too late, and I'm going to lose everything. So I think that in this analogy, we are represented by the first king. God is the second king. And the issue is not, if you don't have what it takes to be a Christian, you'd better give up. In fact, you need to have what it takes in order to be a Christian. The point of this story is you need to figure out that you do not have what it takes. You are not going to be able to pull this off. Therefore, not you don't have what it takes to become a Christian, you don't have what it takes to keep all your stuff, to hold off God and say, no thanks, I'm going to do things the way I want. That's what you do not have enough strength to do. So that's the analogy I think the parable is making. I have my own little kingdom. I have my wealth, my relatives, my comfortable little life. God, through Jesus, is making a demand on me. You may need to give some of that up. You need to care more about following Jesus than keeping your worldly wealth. Well, because keeping worldly wealth seems pretty cool, I might consider seeing if I can just ignore that and keep it for it. Let's just do that. But I have to ask myself, am I actually going to be able to pull that off? Am I actually going to be able to stand against God and keep all of the stuff that I want to keep for myself? Am I going to be able to keep my little kingdom, to preserve it as mine? And if I stop and I think about it in advance, I think, no, I'm not going to be able to do that. So the question is, what should I do? I should come to terms with God now. If I wait till the end, it's going to be too late. I need to come to terms with him now. What are your terms of peace? What do you want from me for us to be okay with each other? And what he wants is, I want you to listen to me and be willing to give up your stuff if that's what's required. So that's why anyone who's going to be a disciple of Jesus needs to be prepared to give up everything, because that is how God wants things to be, and I have no power to change it. There's nothing I can do to say I'm going to make reality such that I can keep all my stuff. It's not going to happen. So the question then is, what is the wise thing to do? The wise thing to do is to make peace with my enemy, God, if you understand what I'm saying. Okay, so this is probably the most out there of the interpretations I will propose for parables tonight. I like it. I think it makes sense, but it's not a very common way of looking at what's happening there. But you can see how it fits into what I'm talking about at this spot is Jesus giving us a way of thinking about what is my situation in relationship to the stuff of my life. And the parable of the hidden treasure says, you know, I would gladly give up what I have in order to get something valuable like that. This one is saying, if I'm rational, I recognize that I am not going to be able to keep it. So the thing to do is to come to those terms that will allow me to proceed on the best terms I can. And as it turns out, the king who's coming to do battle against me is actually pretty generous. So things turn out pretty good. There's also the parable of the unrighteous steward, which I was going to talk about, but we don't have time for that. That's just the element in that story is this steward knows that he's going to lose his job. He is not going to be steward anymore. And he's thinking, what am I going to do when I lose my job? I need to prepare for my future. So what he does, while he still has his stewardship, he goes to all of his master's debtors and said, oh, you know, you owe 100, let's change that to 50. And so he goes and he makes friends with all of his master's debtors while he still has control of the books, basically. So the picture is that he recognizes that he is going to lose his job. He cannot keep this job, but he has it now. So the thing to do is to use the opportunity that he has now to make sure that when he loses this job, he has someplace to go. Well, and you can probably see the analogy, we are going to lose this job. Our lives, everything that we have, this is going to come to an end. And so the question is using what I've got now in a way that is fitting, that will prepare for my future, so that when this is done, I have someplace to go. Again, a good, solid, reasonable reason why I would use my material wealth and resources now in a way that was pleasing to God, because that's the thing that will last in the end. Okay, so I hope whether you agree with me about this parable or any of those, you can see the sort of thing I'm proposing, I hope, which is in each story, Jesus is thinking about a real world situation where we think, yeah, the choice that that person is making is pretty reasonable. That would be a good choice to make in that situation. And Jesus is saying, well, that's kind of like your situation in regard to God. So your choice to value the kingdom of God and the will of God more highly than whatever stuff you have in your life, that is a reasonable, rational, in fact, a delightful choice to make. Okay. Another theme in these parables that are about how our faith is tested and refined during this time when Jesus is gone is talking about humility and repentance. These parables, I think all of them is in one way or another are really aimed at the Pharisees and the religious climate of the time. The Pharisees are a self-righteous bunch, basically. They have taken religion and turned it into, these are the rules that God has set us, and if we keep those rules, then we are the good guys. The most famous of them is probably the Pharisee and the tax collector, where the Pharisee is praying to God, thanks for making me such a great guy, and the tax collector won't even lift his eyes to God and saying, have mercy on me, a sinner. And Jesus says, God likes the tax collector. He doesn't like the Pharisee. So in one way or another, that the need for a humble acknowledgement of the reality of my sin and a repentance so that I might find favor with God. That's a theme that shows up in a number of them, and often aimed at the Pharisees at the time. Okay. So, kind of zooming through these, I want to, hopefully we can step back at the end and kind of try to pull this together, but trying to give you a little overview here. This is one parable is in this category, but to me, this is one of the most important of all of the parables of Jesus. I put a great deal of weight on this parable. I think it is tremendously important. Been very important to me. So I want to talk about this one a little bit. And this is the connection between the fact that God has been merciful to us, and thus how are we going to respond, whether we are going to be merciful to other people. So the parable is the parable of the unforgiving servant, Matthew 18. Okay, so I'm just gonna kind of tell you this story. There's a slave who owes an impossible debt to his king. The amount of money is an amount of money that nobody would have had. It's like saying he owed $1 gazillion. I mean, it was so outrageous that in hearing this story, you would think, that's impossible. Nobody could, you wouldn't live enough years to work up a debt that big. You couldn't possibly have done that. But that's how big in the story his debt is. So the slave is going to, I mean, all kinds of terrible things could happen. Debtor's prison, being sent to the torturers, his family, he's going to lose them. I mean, this is terrible. So he goes to the king and he says, well, look, if you could just give me a little time, give me a little time and I'll pay you back. Well, I mean, he knows that he can't do that. It's impossible for him to pay this amount of money back. It is so huge. But what else can he do? I mean, either he's going to lose everything, or he goes to the king and says, could you please give me some time? I'll pay you back. So the king doesn't do that. What the king does is says, I forgive you the entire debt. You owe me $1 gazillion. I could kill you. I could take everything from you. Instead, I'm wiping the slate clean. You don't owe me anything. Okay, so we'll talk about this more in a minute, but that's a big deal. I mean, that is a huge deal in the life of this slave. It's like, I had a weight that I could not possibly take off of myself, and it is gone. He took it away from me. So another slave comes up to the first one, and I'm making these numbers up. I don't know how you relate to $1 gazillion, but I say, you know, so he owes him $25 or something. He says, so the second slave owes the first slave $25, and the second slave says, if you could just be patient with me, give me a little time, I will pay you back. And so the first slave says, are you kidding? And he throws him into debtor's prison because he owes him the money and hasn't paid him back. Okay, so the king hears about this. And basically, I mean, what it says is, I had mercy on you. Shouldn't you have had mercy on him? But you can kind of see, look, I would think that you would understand the value of mercy. I just forgave you $1 gazillion debt. I mean, but from the way you treated the other slave, I seem to have misunderstood where you're coming from. I seem to think that if you owe a debt, you need to pay it back. Okay, great. You owe me $1 gazillion. Pay it back. Oh, you can't? I'm going to send you to the torturers until you pay it back. Okay, so that's the story that Jesus tells. And he concludes it with, I mean, I realize tonight, this is sobering stuff we're talking about. These are another one of the set of the terrifying words that Jesus speaks to us. My heavenly Father will also do the same to you if each of you does not forgive his brother from your heart. Okay, so this is the ending of that story that he just told. And this is not surprising to us because this echoes something that Jesus said in the Lord's Prayer. You probably remember in the Lord's Prayer. He says, "Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us." In the prayer, we are praying to God, equating, "You forgive me the way I have forgiven others." And then at the end, Jesus says basically, "For if you don't forgive the trespasses of others, your Father will not forgive you," which is kind of this theme again. So this is a very strong statement, very terrifying statement. So what does this parable tell us about that statement? Well, I think it tells us the whole story. We're supposed to put ourselves in the place of this slave. Once again, the way to understand a parable is to put yourself into the situation and think about what is the dynamic here? What are the motives? What are the feelings that are going on? He owes this crushing debt that he can never pay back, and it's going to destroy his life. His master forgives him the entire debt that he could never pay back. This huge, intolerable weight has been lifted from his shoulders. And then he won't forgive the other slave who owes him $25. I really think that we're supposed to conclude that this story is virtually impossible. I mean, the weight that has been lifted from his shoulders is so huge that it's hard to imagine that he could act in this way. If there is one person in the world who ought to understand the value of mercy, it is this slave, because he has just experienced the greatest act of mercy that it would be possible in this life to experience. He is dead guilty of owing $1 gazillion, and yet the entire debt has been forgiven him. How could he not sympathize with his fellow servant who owes him a debt? Well, this is our actual situation before God. We owe a crushing debt to God's justice. We have lived with ourselves our entire lives. I know me. I know what I'm like. We know how greatly we have sinned against God. And yet, God in Christ is totally forgiving the whole thing. Not one bit of it is being held against me and offering me eternal life instead of condemnation. How could I not sympathize with others who are in that same spot? They have sinned against me, yes, but if I understand what God has done for me, then I understand the crushing burden of that guilt in their life as I understand it in my own. So ultimately, for a believer in Jesus, to refuse to acknowledge the need for refuse to pursue being merciful with the people in our lives is to basically refuse to acknowledge that we have a serious guilt problem before God. It's to take the issue of our own guilt and the tremendous mercy that God has extended to us and trivialized it. Okay, yeah, sure. I mean, I'm a Christian. Jesus died for our sins. I know. To confess that I'm a sinner. I'm a sinner. Okay, great. Blah, blah, blah. But right now, I mean, that's all fine. But right now, you messed up against me. Now we're talking something serious. I mean, yeah, on Sunday, I say, I sin and Jesus died and all that stuff. But you just really did something bad. I want my pound of flesh. I want whatever it is I want in retribution for what it is you just did. So it's all very well to say I need God's mercy when it is theoretical and religious, but it is another thing when it actually costs me to be merciful to someone else. So as I often say, I think other people are like a mirror to us. This is what this parable is kind of getting at. If we are truly learning to believe God about our sin, about his mercy and all of that, then when I look at other people's sins, I am seeing myself. That's me. When I feel the hurt and sorrow that comes from their sinning against me, I see that I have brought that hurt and sorrow to the world myself. I mean, the key, sometimes you hear forgiveness described in terms of kind of, well, just kind of forget it. But that's not the point. The point is that I recognize the seriousness of what you have done to me. But I even more recognize the seriousness of my own guilt before God. So I don't downplay what you did, I build up what I did. I say, okay, I understand my problem. And so when I look at you, I see you're another one of those guilty people who needs to find mercy. So that's the logic of the parable. This is why I think this is such an important parable, because it is a very great example of, if you think about the eternal issue about the relationship between faith and works, having belief and what you do. This is one of those places where we can really start to understand how Jesus connect these things, because becoming a merciful person in the way I act is a fruit of growing to more and more understand how great God's mercy has been toward me. The more I understand the mercy, the more I can look at you and say, mercy's okay. I think mercy's a good thing. So I don't go out and prove I'm a believer by forgiving people. I grow into being merciful because the mercy of God is growing in my own mind as I think about my own situation. So this is a great example, I think, of a number of things like that in Jesus' teaching and in the New Testament teaching. And I also really think that it's important because recently I've been teaching through Matthew at our church, and when I was going through the Sermon on the Mount, I found that almost everything that Jesus said could very directly be tied back to things that are taught in the Old Testament. I mean, the golden rule is just almost a verbatim restatement of the law of love your neighbor as yourself. I mean, there's not a lot of difference between them, really. And really, you can go through any number of things that he says and say, essentially, he's just filling out for us the implications of this stuff that had been commanded from the beginning about loving God and loving your neighbor and so forth. But this idea that I am merciful towards others because I understand my own guilt and how merciful God has been to me, I don't really see that idea taught in the Old Testament or anywhere else. It seems to me like a real, wow, Jesus, he was pretty smart. But it is a real innovation in the deepest sense. He is saying something that really captures something about what it means to follow God that you don't find in a lot of places. And that's another reason why this parable is so important to me, because it just really brings out the volitional and emotional depths of this issue that we face when we're dealing with being merciful to other people. So I think it's really important. Okay, so forgive me. I'm gonna keep pushing, and I'm gonna hope that we have a little time to answer questions at the end, if you have them. I'm sure that you don't have any questions because I've been very clear. But okay, so hang in there with me. Okay, so we have famous parables that talk about being loving and compassionate people. We talked about the parable of the Good Samaritan before. These three parables here, the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the prodigal son, I just want to make a really, really brief comment about them. This won't take long, I don't think, but I'm treating these three together because essentially they are meant to work together, I would say. They are essentially making the same point, although it's not immediately apparent that that's the case. Okay, so certainly, I'm sure that you're familiar with the story of the prodigal son. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that, but I think we would start kind of feeling like we kind of basically know what the point of these parables are. We think of these stories as showing Jesus and God's heart for the lost, their compassion for sinners, And we're not wrong about that. They are showing that. This is a very strong element in these stories. So the two stories, searching for the lost sheep and the lost coin, we understand the logic of them. When I lose a sheep, I don't think, oh, well, I've got 99 others. It's like, no, that lost sheep becomes this focus. I want to get it back. The woman who has the coin, who loses the coin, doesn't say, oh, well, I've got 9 others. It's no big deal. It's lost. It's a big deal. I need to do something about this. The fact that they are lost is important to me. I rejoice when I get them back. And of course, the story of the prodigal son is such a powerful picture of a father's forgiving heart. I mean, it is a powerful story. I mean, it's just a powerful story about the son who wastes everything and finally realizes that he should go back to the father, and the father runs out to him and welcomes him with open arms. I mean, this is like every person who has ever screwed up responds to this story of the person who overlooks it and welcomes you back and throws a party because you're back, even though you're a total screw up. I mean, that is a great story. So all of that, I agree with all that, except these 3 stories are introduced in this way. Now all the tax collectors and the sinners were coming near him to listen to him. Both the Pharisees and the scribes began to grumble, saying, "This man receives sinners and eats with them." So he told them this parable, saying, and then we have the parable of the sheep, parable of the coin, and the parable of the prodigal son. These stories are told to Pharisees who are grumbling because he is talking to sinners. And when I think it's fairly clear that they believe that he's from God, he ought to be hanging around with them, congratulating them on what righteous people they are. I mean, those guys are the ones that screwed up. So what are you doing with them? Aren't you a righteous person? Don't you recognize what good guys we are? What are you doing over there? So in the light of that's the situation, there are certain things that we can highlight from these stories. First of all, in the first 2 stories, after the lost thing is found, the owner rejoices, but then it describes the owner throws a party, and the owner calls together the friends and neighbors and says, "Rejoice with me, for I have found the thing which was lost." So the sheep is found, the coin is found, and when it's found, the person says to his friends and neighbors, "Rejoice with me, I've got it back." And we can imagine, if you think about the story, it's easy to understand. The friends and neighbors would understand the concern when it was lost. The friends and neighbors would understand the joy when it is found. I mean, that's not hard to picture, is that, yeah, my friends are going to be happy for me when they say, "Yeah, I'm so sorry you lost that coin. Yeah, I hope you find it." "Oh, great, you found it. This is great." So let's think about how were the Pharisees responding in this situation when Jesus is hanging around with the tax gatherers and the sinners. And then in the story of the prodigal son, remember, the story doesn't end with the father saying, "Oh, I'm so happy he's back. We'll kill the fatted calf and put a ring on his hand, and we're going to throw a big party and everybody's going to come." The end. That's not where the story ends. The story ends with the story about the brother. The brother is the one, there were 2 brothers, and the prodigal is the one who took his inheritance and went out and wasted it with immoral living. The other brother is the one who stayed home. He didn't do that. He stayed home, and every day he was there, his dad said, "Could you take out the trash?" And he took out the trash, and just every day he's there doing whatever it is his dad says to do. So supposedly the brother who's at home is the one who has been obedient to the father, but in fact he shows that he doesn't understand the father at all. He is ticked off that his foolish brother is getting a party. "Why don't you give me a party? I'm the one who deserves it. I'm the one who stayed here the whole time. I'm the one who's done what you want." So in these stories, Jesus is confronting the Pharisees with their lack of understanding of God and God's compassion. They think that they are the good guys, like the brother in the story, and that the Messiah should praise them and reject the sinners, when in fact the heart of God is to reach out to those who are lost and save them. So the powerful story of the Father's love for the prodigal son is indeed a powerful picture of God's love. I'm not trying to play that down. I love that story. It cannot help but capture your imagination when you hear that story. But that's not really the end of the story and even the main focus of the story. Because in the story, that powerful picture of the love of the Father serves as a contrast to the attitude of the brother. Why isn't the brother excited because his brother is coming back after all this time? Because he's more concerned that it's not fair. I'm the one who did all the right stuff, and then here you are rejoicing over him. So in that story, the Pharisees stand in the place of the brother. So this idea of the love and compassion of God inspiring us to recognize and emulate that love and compassion and as we deal with others, those three together actually have a very interesting function in the way Jesus deals with the Pharisees, because he really is dealing with the heart, the spirit of them as they're dealing with this question of what it means to be a, quote, righteous person. So very, very interesting in that way, I think. I'm calling these the delay as the greatest test. These are all associated with the Olivet Discourse, which you may be aware of. This is Jesus teaching on the destruction of the temple and ultimately when is he going to come back, as the Messiah to establish the kingdom and its glory and all that kind of stuff. So Jesus makes it clear that there may be a long delay before he returns in the Olivet Discourse. And he says, I don't even know myself when I'm coming back. That's how mysterious it is about how long this is going to be. No one but the Father knows how long this period of time is going to be. So if we're his disciples, we need to be prepared for his absence. One of the most challenging and testing things about this situation is just the fact that he's gone. And when he's gone, that means that life goes on from day to day as if it's just always going to go on this way. I mean, it just seems like, sure. I mean, 2,000 years ago, this guy named Jesus was here. I'm a Christian. He's my Lord and everything. But, tomorrow is going to be like today. I'm going to go to bed tonight. I'm going to get up in the morning and have to make breakfast. And I'm going to have to take care of myself. I'm going to have to make sure that things work out well for me, because what else are you going to do? That's what you have to do, right? So, for example, how will a servant respond when the master gives him a task and then departs? Well, there are two sorts of responses you might have. There's the servant who says, well, my master wants me to do this, so this is what I'm going to do. And he just does it. He feeds the other servants. He does the tasks that the master gave him to do. And the thing about that is, then it doesn't matter when the master comes back, because each day he gets up and says, well, this is what my master said that I should do, so that's what I'm going to do. And so if the master comes back tomorrow, he's going to find him doing what he's supposed to. If he comes back in a year, he's going to find him doing what he was supposed to. If he comes back in 10 years, he's going to find him doing what he was supposed to, because his focus is, this is what I'm supposed to do, so that's what I'm going to do. But there's another way he could have responded, which is after a bit think, this is going to be a long time before he comes back. And so he starts ignoring what it is that the master had told him to do. In fact, he's mistreating the slaves, and he's partying and carousing. So what Jesus says is, for him, the master is going to come back on a day he doesn't expect. And it's not that the other servant knew when the master was coming back, but it didn't matter when the master was coming back, because he just was doing what he was supposed to. But for this one, he needs to kind of figure out when the master's coming back, because he's not doing what he's supposed to. If he wants to look good when the master shows up, he'd better figure out when he's coming. But he's not paying attention to that. Oh, that's going to be a long time. And the fact that it's such a long time in his mind means that he doesn't have to pay attention to it, which means ultimately it's going to catch him unawares. Okay, so there's an example of the sort of thing in these parables, the idea that the very absence of Jesus is going to represent this challenge. You have the 10 maidens who are going off to the wedding, but they're waiting for the bridegroom, but 5 of them don't take oil for their lamps. Why didn't they take oil for their lamps? Because they didn't think he was going to be very long in coming. He'll be right back. But he does stay a long time, and so now, oh, I'm not prepared for the fact that he's gone for a long time. That's the sort of stories that these are, about how the absence of Jesus presents this challenge that we have to sort out. How are we going to live while he's gone, keeping in mind the fact that he is coming back? So that's what those stories are about. Okay. And in one way or another, we could go through each one of those, and each has a different sort of emphasis, but each one kind of highlights in that way that the big challenge is, this is the time when the one that I am answerable to is gone. So what am I going to do about that? Okay. I think, yes. Okay. All right. I'm going to do this. I got one more. This is the last one. Still, again, the time of testing, the time when Jesus is gone, where we must work out our faith. These parables are about prayer and the question of whether, in the face of the absence of the Messiah, life goes on, suffering goes on, can I have any confidence that I can actually count on this God that I am calling out to, praying to? I love these parables as well. In fact, I ended up, because I think they're intriguing and there's a lot to be said about them, I ended up, for my master's thesis at Reformed Theological Seminary, my thesis was on these 2 parables. So they're very interesting to me. I would love to now start again and just talk about these 2 parables with you, but we won't do that. But I'm gonna talk about the unjust judge a little bit. This one's really interesting too, but we don't have time for that. I tried to stuff in about 20 things, and I decided that probably wasn't going to work. And since we only have a little bit of time left, I was probably right about that too. So, okay, so the unjust judge. There is a reason that I think this parable is so important, and that is that it raises a very important distinction that I want to discuss for a minute. This is a parable about a widow who goes back to a judge over and over again until she gets what she wants. Okay? So it is sometimes said that this parable is about persistence in prayer. The idea being, it teaches us that if we want something from God, we keep asking until we get it. That's what she did. She kept asking until she got it. So that's what we're supposed to do with God. Say if I'm sick and I want healing, I should not take no for an answer. If I ask God and he says no, then I ask him again, and I ask him again, and I keep asking until I get the answer yes, because this is what Jesus is saying that I should do. I should keep going back until I get the answer yes. So I want to argue that that is not the point of this parable. That's not what Jesus is saying. What I want to contrast that with is the idea of perseverance in prayer. And what I really mean is perseverance in faith while I am praying. I am continuing to believe God. In this scenario, God has promised something, but it has not yet come. We ask, and yet it is still not here. Perseverance means that we don't lose faith in God, but keep asking because we know that ultimately he is going to keep his promise. That's what I think this parable is about, and I hope the distinction is clear. One says, if I want something from God, keep asking. That's the way to get it. The other is, if God has promised to do something, I should not give up on him, but I should continue to turn to him, to cry out to him until he keeps the promise that he has made. Okay, so very briefly, the previous context. Just before this, he said to the disciples, the days will come when you will long to see one of the days of the Son of Man, and you will not see it. This is a discussion about his ultimate coming back, his second coming. And what he's saying is, you know, this is going to be tough. I'm going to be gone, and it's going to come around when folks are going to be longing for my return, but you won't see it. Doesn't happen. So, and then he talks about what is going to happen when he returns. Then we come to this parable. And Luke starts the parable by saying, now he was telling them a parable to show that at all times they ought to pray and not to lose heart, saying, and then he tells the parable. His explanation is very important. They ought to pray at all times. They ought not lose heart. And there is a connection between these things. When we lose heart, then we stop praying. When we lose heart, then when we've decided that it just doesn't make any sense to keep going back to God because he's not coming through, so I'm giving up on God, I'm not going back to him anymore, then we will not continue to pray. And this, I'm arguing, follows from the previous context. We will long for the Son to return, but we will not see it. But we should not lose heart, but instead we should continue to turn to God in prayer for him to keep his promises and ultimately for the Son to return and to make things right. And to confirm that that's what's going on, at the very end of the parable, Jesus says, however, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth? That is, in the parable, Jesus is going to argue that indeed God will respond to our cries for justice, our cries for Jesus to return and to make things right. But the answer to those cries will be when Jesus returns. But the question is there actually going to be anyone left who's expecting him to come when he finally comes in answer to the cries of God's people? So the issue in this prayer is, am I going to continue to cry out to God in prayer, given the fact that we've been crying out for so long, and yet the answer has still not come? That's what this parable is about. So, in a certain city, there was a judge who did not fear God and did not respect man. There was a widow in that city, and she kept coming to him saying, give me legal protection from my opponent. Okay, so this is a bad judge. A judge who fears God is one who cares about justice and what's right. He doesn't. So she's going to a judge who does not care about what's right. And this is a judge who doesn't respect people. So the judge doesn't care about what's right, and he doesn't care about her either. He is totally uninterested in the project, which is her coming to him and saying, give me justice. He doesn't care about justice. He doesn't care about her. So she keeps going back, it says. Evidently, he keeps saying no because she keeps going back. For a while, he was unwilling, but afterward he said to himself, even though I do not fear God nor respect man, yet because this widow bothers me, I will give her legal protection. Otherwise, by continually coming, she will wear me out. Okay, so the judge doesn't care what is right. He doesn't care about the widow, so he is unwilling to do what she asks. Why should I? Maybe he's waiting for a bribe, and she can't afford to give him a bribe. That's quite possible. But after a while, he thinks about the situation. If she keeps coming, this could end up being bad for him. In the end, he decides that it is in his own best interest to give her what she wants. Now, I won't go into the details about exactly why it is in his best interest. There are some translation issues here. Is she will wear me out the best way to translate this? There are several possibilities. I won't go into all that. But it is clear the judge decides that he's going to get rid of her by giving her what she wants. Okay. And the Lord said, hear what the unrighteous judge said. Now, will not God bring about justice for his elect, who cry to him day and night? And will he delay long over them? I tell you that he will bring about justice for them quickly. Okay, so Jesus says, hear what the unrighteous judge said. What did the unrighteous judge do? Even though the judge is unrighteous, he said yes. He actually said yes to her request. So he says, look at that. This unrighteous judge said yes. So it was clearly the right thing for her to do to keep asking, because as it turned out, even a sleazebag judge might ultimately decide to say yes. And he did. I mean, what did she have to lose? Let's keep going back. And ultimately, he said yes. Well, Jesus goes on, will not God bring about justice for his elect who cry to him day and night? God is exactly different from the judge. God absolutely cares about righteousness. No one cares about righteousness more than God. And he loves his elect, the ones crying to him. So if a judge who doesn't care about righteousness and doesn't care about the widow finally ended up saying yes, how much more sense is it to go back to God, who cares about justice and who loves his people? The power of this parable is an argument from the greater to the lesser. I would formulate it like this: if it makes sense to keep going back to the judge who has great resistance to saying yes, then it really makes sense to keep going back to God, who has no resistance to saying yes because of his character. But once again, let's be clear about the situation. Notice how Jesus describes the elect here. They are those who cry to him day and night. This crying has been going on a long time. It goes back to the Old Testament. How long, O Lord, is a refrain that shows up in several places. God's people cry out to him to bring justice. They were crying at the time when Jesus came, and Jesus left again. He didn't fix things. Things are still tough. So God's people continue. As Jesus is gone, we continue to cry for him to make things right, to establish righteousness and justice on the earth, to deliver us ultimately from the unrighteous enemy who would destroy us. We are crying out for God to keep his promise and make the world right. Now, there is a tension in this parable. As we finish up here, Jesus is acknowledging that we are like this widow. We keep crying out, and still the justice has not come. And yet, he says that God will not delay and will come quickly. So we're not getting the answer, and it may be a long time before we get the answer, but God will not delay. So what is helpful to me in thinking about this is this little passage from Habakkuk 2:3. It says, for the vision is yet for the appointed time. It hastens toward the goal, and it will not fail. Though it tarries, wait for it will certainly come. It will not delay. So this is a situation where Habakkuk is crying out for resolution to a very difficult situation. And there's this vision that is saying, yes, ultimately God is going to step in. God is going to fix all this stuff, but you have to wait for it. Though it tarries, that is, though it's not here yet, and you keep waiting and it's not here, and it's still not here, and it's still not here, wait for it will certainly come. It will not delay. So it will tarry, but it will not delay. So clearly the idea is not that it may not take a while, because it is going to take a while. But delaying seems to be more like, is God hesitant to answer? Is it possible he won't answer? Is he stringing us along? No, the answer will certainly come. He is not waiting 1 second more than is necessary. That's what's happening in Habakkuk, and I think that's what Jesus is saying in this parable. That yes, God's people cry out to him and have cried out to him for centuries, and since Jesus spoke these words, they have cried out to him for centuries more. But considering the character of God, think about what you know about who God is. It made sense for this widow to keep going back to that judge. So how much more does it make sense for us not to give up on God, but to keep turning to him, because he will certainly answer the cry of his people for justice. That is absolutely going to happen. And then that ending again, however, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth? Because it is the coming of the Son of Man that is going to be the answer to the cries of God's people throughout the centuries. The cries to make things right will be answered finally and fully when Jesus returns. But the question is, will there be anyone left? Will anyone be left who will be calling out for him to come? Because it's a time of delay. Who knows how long it will be before the answer comes ultimately. Okay, so I just say, here's what I see in the parables. The parables use analogies to make vivid to us the thinking, the emotions, the rationale behind the choices that need to be made in following Jesus. The Messiah has come to call his people to follow him and live out their faith. They are not to follow the self-righteousness and worldliness of the religious culture of Jesus' day. Instead, they are to think deeply about what is true and pursue it. They are to decide whether they're willing to abandon the treasures of this world to follow Jesus. They must humble themselves before God, confessing their sin and repenting. They must grant the same mercy to others that they themselves need from God. They are to be like God and pursue love and compassion for others. They are to understand that Jesus may be long in returning and must concentrate on living faithfully day by day. Then they will be ready when he returns. And they can be confident that however long it takes, God will answer their cries and send Jesus to make everything right. That's in a nutshell, that's the message of the parables. Considered as a body of teaching, that's the sort of thing that Jesus is trying to get across. Okay, so I left you a full 5 minutes for questions. Sorry about that. Maybe 3 sessions wasn't quite long enough to talk about the parables. Anything that you'd like to ask about?
How fully do you think that Jesus meant to undermine the Pharisees' picture of what the Messiah would do? And I guess what I'm asking in a different way is, he spends a lot of time talking about the delay and how it's not looking like they thought. And was his answer, you guys got this wrong, it's not now, but it's later? Or you guys got this wrong, it's not at all what you thought it was going to be?
Well, I think there's some of both. Like when Jesus tells the parable, it's kind of a parable. It's the one about the sheep and the goats. But the idea is there is a day coming when the Son of Man is going to come and sit on his glorious throne, and he is going to sort out the sheep from the goats. Well, that's the sort of thing that the Pharisees were expecting to happen like right now, with them playing the role of the sheep. What's different in that story is that what Jesus says is the basis of judgment is going to be this period of time while I was gone, you're going to be judged on what you did, how you treated me. And they said, well, wait a minute, what do you mean? You weren't around. What do you mean how we treated you? And that's where he says, well, the way you treated these people, that's the way you treated me. So the basis for judging who would be a sheep and who would be a goat is different. It's just fundamentally different from the way the Pharisees pictured it. But they're not wrong to think that ultimately the Messiah would come as a king who would gather together his people and establish justice and righteousness on the earth. I mean, Jesus embraces that picture. So in that sense, does that answer your question?
I think it does.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Anything else? Go watch some skating? Is that what's tonight? Okay. Well, thanks for coming. I have enjoyed this opportunity to try to pull my thoughts together on the parables. I haven't looked at them in a while, so that's great. Thank you.